Mark Reynolds had always considered himself a man of principle. A devoted husband, a hard worker, someone who lived within the quiet routines of marriage and responsibility. Yet, as he sat in his dimly lit living room that evening, scrolling absently through his phone, a message arrived that would shake the foundation of that certainty. Emma Carter, "Hey Mark. My internet's down again. Any chance you could help?" Mark hesitated. The request itself was harmless. He had helped the Carters with their Wi-Fi before. David Carter, Emma's father, traveled often for work, leaving Emma alone more than she probably should be at her age. But something about this message felt different. Maybe it was the hour, 9:47 p.m., or maybe it was the way she had always been, just a little too warm in her interactions with him. A smile that lingered. A playful nudge that lasted a second too long. Still, it was just an internet issue. That was all. He glanced toward the kitchen where his wife, Sarah, was still working on her laptop, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. "Emma's internet is down," he said casually. "I'm just going to check it out real quick." Sarah barely looked up. "I'm okay. Don't be too long." The ease with which she said it, the lack of suspicion, twisted something inside him. Not because he had anything to feel guilty about, but because it meant she trusted him. Completely. Mark grabbed his jacket and stepped out into the cool night air. Emma's house was just across the street, its windows softly lit, casting a warm glow onto the empty sidewalk. He knocked lightly. The door opened almost immediately. Emma stood there in a loose, off-the-shoulder sweater and fitted shorts, her long dark hair tumbling over one side. "You're a lifesaver," she said, flashing him that effortless smile. Mark cleared his throat. "Not a problem. Where's the router?" She stepped aside, gesturing him in. The house smelled faintly of vanilla and something floral. He tried not to notice. The living room was dim, only the flicker of a scented candle providing ambient light. She led him to the small desk in the corner, where the router sat blinking erratically. Mark crouched down, already diagnosing the issue. "Looks like it might just need a reboot." Emma leaned against the edge of the desk, arms crossed, watching him. "You're really good at this." He gave a small chuckle, keeping his focus on the cables. "I do it for a living." "Right." She tilted her head slightly. "But I bet you don't make house calls this late for just anyone." His hands faltered for half a second before he composed himself. "You're my neighbor." "That's different." She let the silence stretch between them, studying him in a way that made him feel oddly exposed. Then softly she asked, "Are you happy, Mark?" He froze. It was a question loaded with implication, one that hung between them, heavy and unspoken. He turned to look at her, really look at her. Emma was 20, young and reckless in a way he had long outgrown. Yet there was something in her gaze, something bold, curious, testing boundaries that shouldn't be tested. He swallowed. "That's a complicated question." Emma smiled, slow and knowing. "Most good questions are." Mark exhaled, returning his attention to the router. He pressed the reset button, watching as the lights flickered back to life. "That should do it." Emma didn't move. She stayed there watching him, waiting. The quiet between them felt dangerous, like standing too close to the edge of a ledge, knowing one wrong step could send you over. Then she took that step for him. "I don't think you came here just to fix the internet." Mark stood slowly, forcing a small, strained chuckle. "What are you talking about?" She reached out, fingertips just barely grazing the fabric of his sleeve. "I think you knew what you were walking into." His pulse kicked up, his throat suddenly dry. This was a line. A very clear, very dangerous line. He should step back. He should leave. He should. His phone buzzed. "Sarah." Mark glanced at the screen, his wife's name glowing brightly. Simple message. "Sarah, you good?" Guilt hit him like a fist to the ribs. "I should go," he said quickly, stepping back. Emma didn't look surprised. She just studied him, a slow smirk playing on her lips. "Her. If that's what you want." Mark hesitated for half a second too long. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door. As he crossed the street back to his own home, heart pounding, he told himself that was the end of it. He didn't believe it for a second. Mark barely slept that night. Lying in bed next to Sarah, he stared at the ceiling, his mind tangled in thoughts he had no business entertaining. Emma's words echoed in his head, each syllable teasing out an unrest he couldn't shake. "I don't think you came here just to fix the internet." He turned onto his side, watching Sarah's slow, steady breathing. She looked peaceful, unaware, wrapped in the kind of trust that had once felt like a foundation but now felt like a weight. Mark squeezed his eyes shut. He had done nothing wrong. He had walked away. But the fact that he had to remind himself of that only made it worse. By morning, the weight hadn't lifted. At breakfast, Sarah moved around the kitchen, still caught up in her work mindset. "I've got back-to-back meetings today," she said, buttering her toast. "What about you?" "Just the usual," Mark muttered. Her phone buzzed, and she checked it without pausing. Mark studied her neat hair, the way she held her coffee absent-mindedly while scrolling emails. She was beautiful, successful, reliable. Yet, something had shifted in the space between them, something he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. Was it boredom? Complacency? Before he could answer his own question, his own phone vibrated. He didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. "Emma, you forgot something here last night." Mark's stomach tightened. He glanced at Sarah, but she was too focused on her phone to notice the sudden stiffness in his posture. Ignore it. That was the logical choice. The right choice. Instead, his fingers moved before his brain could stop them. "Mark, what?" A moment later, another message. "Emma, come see." His pulse quickened, but he forced himself to drop the phone face down on the counter. This was a test. He had already passed it once. He just had to do it again. "I should get going," he said, pushing back from the table. Sarah gave a distracted nod. "See you later." And that was it. No suspicion. No second glance. He walked out the door, fully intending to head straight to work. But as he reached his car, his gaze drifted across the street. Emma's house. The curtains were drawn, but he could feel her presence behind them, waiting. Mark clenched his jaw. Just drive. Just go to work. Yet, instead of getting into his car, his feet carried him across the street. Emma answered the door with a smirk. "I was starting to think you wouldn't show," she teased, leaning against the frame. Mark exhaled sharply. "What did I forget?" She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Come in and find out." He hesitated. His pulse drummed against his skin, but he told himself this was nothing. Game maybe. One he could still walk away from. The door shut softly behind him. The house smelled the same as it had the night before. Vanilla and something sweet he couldn't quite place. She padded barefoot across the wooden floor, leading him to the living room. His eyes flickered around, searching for something. His jacket, his phone charger, anything that would justify his being here. Nothing. Emma turned to him, arms crossed. "You look nervous." "I just don't have time for games," he said, more forcefully than he intended. She arched a brow. "Then why are you here?" Mark opened his mouth, but no words came. She took a slow step forward, closing the space between them. "You think I don't notice?" Her voice was softer now, almost amused. "The way you hesitate. The way you look at me when you think I won't notice." "Emma, you want to pretend you're the good guy," she interrupted. "That you came here for some innocent reason." She leaned in, close enough that he could feel her breath against his skin. "But we both know that's not true." Mark felt his resolve slipping, unraveling thread by thread. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. The spell shattered. He took a sharp step back, exhaling like he had been holding his breath underwater. Emma didn't move, but the smirk was still there, the kind that said she knew she had won something, even if it was just the knowledge that he had wanted to stay. Mark pulled out his phone. "Sarah. Sarah. Did you leave your laptop at home?" Reality slammed back into place. His wife. His life. The thin ice he was standing on. I have to go, he said, voice tight. Emma didn't stop him. She didn't need to. As he turned toward the door, her voice followed him like a whisper against his spine. You'll be back. Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. Mark drove to work in a haze, gripping the steering wheel as if it could anchor him. The city blurred past in streaks of red taillights and morning sunlight, but his thoughts were fixed on Emma, on the way she had looked at him, the way she had spoken as if she knew him better than he knew himself. You'll be back. The words slithered through his mind, taunting him. She was wrong. She had to be wrong. At a red light, he glanced at his phone. A new message from Sarah. Sarah. Never mind, I found your laptop. Have a good day, love you. Mark exhaled, guilt tightening like a vice around his ribs. He should have felt relieved. Instead he felt caught. Not by Sarah, but by himself. By the weight of what had almost happened. What could still happen if he didn't pull himself together? The light turned green. He pressed the gas, trying to outrun his own thoughts. By midday, work had done little to distract him. Sitting at his desk, he stared at lines of code on his screen, but the logic blurred. He checked his phone again. No new messages from Emma. No smug follow-ups. No traps waiting to be sprung. Maybe she had moved on already. Maybe she was just playing a game. But if that were true, why did he feel disappointed? A voice snapped him back to the present. Hey man, you good? Mark looked up to see his coworker, Jason, hovering by his desk. Yeah, Mark lied, forcing a smile. Just tired. Jason gave him a skeptical look but didn't push. A few of us are grabbing drinks after work. You in? Mark hesitated. Normally he'd go, anything to shake off the stress of the day, but tonight he needed to be home, to be with Sarah, to remind himself of what was real. Nah, I'll pass, he said. Jason shrugged. Suit yourself. As he walked away, Mark's phone vibrated. His stomach clenched before he even looked. Emma, miss me yet? Mark stared at the screen, pulse thudding in his ears. He should ignore it, delete it, block her number. Instead, his fingers hovered over the keyboard. Mark, this needs to stop. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then stop. His throat tightened. She was making this his problem, shifting the blame onto him. But wasn't she right? He was the one who kept engaging, the one who had walked into her house twice. This wasn't her fault. It was his. That evening, Mark arrived home determined to make things right. He kissed Sarah longer than usual when he walked in, held her waist a little tighter. She gave him a surprised look but smiled. Good day, she asked, setting the table. Better now, he said, meaning it. They ate dinner together, something that had become increasingly rare in their busy schedules. Sarah talked about work, about a new project she was leading. Mark listened, nodding in the right places, but part of him was still elsewhere. She deserved better than that. So, I was thinking, Sarah said, setting down her fork. It's been a while since we took a weekend for ourselves. What if we went somewhere? Just as Mark blinked. Like a trip. Maybe up to the lake house. No work, no distractions. Just as the lake house. Their sanctuary. The place where they had spent anniversaries, long weekends, nights wrapped up in each other. Fresh start. A way to reset. Mark reached across the table, squeezing her hand. That sounds perfect. For the first time all day he felt like he could breathe. Then his phone buzzed. He didn't check it, but he didn't have to. Somehow he already knew who it was. And he already knew that Emma wasn't going to let him go that easily.